How could 800 children die in a place where they're supposed to be looked after by a religious institution? Once I started looking into it, it became clear that there was this enormous can of worms to do with the way in which the Catholic Church was effectively abusing mothers and babies, and not just in Tuam, but right across Ireland as well. I'm Laurence Lee, and I've been covering stories about what I call institutional violence against women in Ireland. And between us, I think it's one of the most outrageous human rights abuses that most of the outside world doesn't know anything about. I'd never even heard of Tuam. It's a completely anonymous little place right in the middle of Ireland, which nobody had ever heard of at all until in 2014. This historian discovered that underneath there, and in the grounds of what used to be a great big mother and baby home, were the remains of 800 babies whose bodies had been dumped by the nuns who ran this home in sewage tanks.
They didn't have coffins, they were wrapped in shrouds.
How on earth could this have happened? Go back to the foundation of the Irish state just after the end of the First World War. Catholic dogma and hardline Catholic thinking really were a massive part of what it meant for them to regard themselves as an independent country. Becoming pregnant outside marriage in these times was regarded as a sin and effectively as a crime. Even if you were sexually abused or raped, it was demanded of you that you went with your unborn baby into the care of the religious orders, and they then were in charge of everything to do with your fate.
From 1922, new mother and baby homes sprung up across the country, presented to young women as a solution to their shameful sin. In the near 7 decades of their existence, more than 30,000 women would pass through their doors.
And so when the baby was born, which was without painkillers and without any sort of medical treatment to ease the suffering, we'd been told the nuns would whisper in the women's ears, "Was it worth this for your 2 minutes of pleasure?" And as soon as the baby was born, it was taken away from the mother, who was then forced to work for free in either the mother and baby home or one of the associated Magdalen laundries for a year, and then the baby was in the care of the nuns. If it died, it seemed to have been simply disposed of, and it's broadly held that at least 6,000 babies died of things like starvation. If it lived up to the age of possibly 3 or 4, it was then usually adopted out, very often to American families who weren't checked for their suitability to be a parent. And usually the woman who gave birth in the mother and baby home never saw her child again. It just seems like really, really cruel forms of punishment to people who may have done absolutely nothing wrong.
I was told inside my name was Jane. Besides, for taking my culture from me, my family away from me, they took my name.
And I started thinking, this is absolutely enormous. The state benefited from this as well as the church. The church became very rich and had enormous amounts of power. The state effectively benefited because the people became very passive. All these things seem to run so counter to your perception of what Ireland is. Very open, liberal, young, vibrant sorts of place. Underneath all that, you find this real darkness. Most people in Ireland know about all this, certainly the older generations. They're the grandparents of people who now might not be able to believe that this actually happened. But everybody somehow had some sort of role to play in it. And my suspicion is that there is a whole load of national residual guilt and embarrassment about the role that society actively played in this institutional violence against women throughout much of the 20th century in Ireland. There has been no justice so far. I really hope more than anything else that people in the outside world try and understand a bit better about all these things that happened in Ireland.